Hello and welcome to a TRL podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Connected and automated vehicles, or CAVs, are emerging rapidly from research to reality. Many vehicles on the road today have some type of automated driving system, helping to save lives and prevent injuries, and this technology may one day result in fully self-driving vehicles. We're here today with two experts supporting the transition to automated vehicles on our roads. We are going to explore, why is the idea of CAVs so alluring? When are CAVs really likely to become mainstream? Why are questions about safety at the heart of the pace of change? And we're going to discuss who decides how safe is safe enough. I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Camilla Fowler and David Hynd. Perhaps we can start by asking you both to introduce yourselves.
My name's Camilla Fowler and I'm Head of Risk Management at TRL. My background is very much in the development and review of operational safety cases for automated vehicle trials and testing. And most recently, I've technically authored BS PAS 1881 that sets out the minimum requirements for a safety case for AV.
My name is David Hynd and I'm Chief Scientist for Safety and Investigations. Most of my work revolves around the safety of vehicles, safety aspects of the design of vehicles like crash structures and pedestrian protection features, and more recently then development of automated vehicles.
So, okay, maybe we should start with the fundamental question, what is a CAV?
Well, I think it's usually means two things, really, which are not necessarily in the same vehicle. So there's connectivity and there's automation. And I think the long-term vision for things is that a vehicle would have both of those things, but actually you could apply connectivity to an existing vehicle, and you can apply automation to a vehicle that doesn't have connectivity. The connectivity may be from one vehicle to another vehicle, it may be from the vehicle to the infrastructure. There's all sorts of options there and different things you can do with that connectivity, either to help with safety or more likely to help with journey efficiency and fuel efficiency and so forth. The automation actually can mean a whole range of things as well. So that might mean at one level just controlling the steering or the braking, with the human still actually in charge of the vehicle, but the automation is doing some part of the driving task. Or it could be that the automation is doing both steering and acceleration and braking at the same time, again with the human having full control and oversight of that. And then it builds progressively through to where the vehicle is doing the automation and you do not any longer need to have oversight of the system. So you could be getting on with another task. You could be checking your emails, you could ultimately one day maybe even be having a sleep.
So there's a conception, isn't there, of what a CAV is. What's out there in the public? What is the definition as far as the person in the street?
Well, I think the person in the street imagines that it's going to be a self-driving vehicle and maybe don't realise that there are different levels of automation, and we go from assisted driving where actually your vehicle is helping you with the task, or you've got a connected vehicle that is assisting you in terms of maybe traffic flow or the position of other vehicles, down to a fully automated vehicle where maybe you are taking the driver out of the loop. I think at the moment it's very much about the entire system, so it's about the vehicle, the infrastructure, and the driver all as one system, rather than actually taking that driver away at this point.
So let's ask the fundamental question. What is safe enough?
It sounds like a very simple question, but it's actually really big and I think quite difficult question to answer. So a lot of people talk about defining safety in terms of a comparison with human drivers. So you could say it's got to be at least as safe as human drivers. Got to have no more collisions, no more serious injuries, no more deaths than we currently have on the road network. But if we think about the number of collisions that involve a human component, some kind of failing in from the human driver, in terms of, for instance, drunk driving or speeding and various other factors, if the car is doing the driving task, then it automatically doesn't have any of those things. So for me, the target has actually got to be, as a minimum, quite a lot better than human, because it should perform at least as well as a very good, alert human driver who is paying attention to the driving task. And that then is actually quite a lot safer than humans on average, because everybody sometimes is not as awake as they should be, or is not paying as much attention as they should be. And we have other poor behaviours on the road as well. So for me, the target should be actually quite a lot better than we currently have with human drivers. But that still is quite a woolly definition.
I think for me there's two elements to it. There's the what is safe enough, or how can we demonstrate that a vehicle is safe enough to take the safety driver out? And that's sort of a future question. The vehicle's got to be able to demonstrate that it can actually deal with the scenarios that it's likely to come across in sort of standard driving. But the key question for me at the moment is, how safe is your trial and testing during this development phase? So how can you demonstrate that your trial or your tests are safe enough to be on the UK network right now? And that's sort of really where safety cases come in, where you have that sort of structured argument and you have supporting evidence that says, yes, we've done this testing, this is what we're going to be doing, and we have the evidence to show that actually we've got enough in place, or enough control in place, for this trial to be safe enough on the roads at the moment.
So how important is it to define what is safe in this context?
Well, I think it's important in the context I was talking about in terms of trials, testing and the development of vehicles. I think it's important to have a very consistent way of showing or demonstrating that there is a level of safety prior to testing on the road network. And through the safety case, and we're the technical author of BS PAS 1881, which sets out the minimum requirements for a safety case. If you meet those requirements and you build a robust safety case, you can demonstrate that there is a level of safety sort of associated with your trial. And I think it's very important that you do have that consistency. So stakeholders, whether they're landowners or insurers or road authorities giving permission, they actually have a way of evaluating that safety case and understanding whether they should be accepting that testing.
So essentially, defining what is safe it could save lives.
Oh, absolutely. I think one of our big risks at the moment is that we could end up with an incident or a collision during that development phase. And at that point, you've eroded public trust and you've created an unnecessary risk on the road. I think that by having a safety case where you've considered what your risks are, you've put in appropriate controls, you have a trained and competent safety driver, you have test objectives that are very much in line with your ODD. I think having that approach is likely to save lives and make sure that people actually are thinking about it and controlling the risks before even going out onto the network.
I think it's important to think about the end goal as well of deployment of automated vehicles on the roads. And one of the key expected benefits is a big improvement in road safety. So you could aim for automated vehicles having a very, very close to zero risk of causing a collision or causing an injury or a fatality. But that will take a very long time to develop systems to that level, and it will take a very long time to prove that they're at that level. So there's a balance to be made. If you wait that long, a lot of people will have been injured and killed in the meantime. So I think part of the idea is to find a good balance between what you're really aiming for long term and being able to save lives and serious injuries already along the way as you go along that journey.
So where are we on the journey towards a CAV future?
Well, there's been a lot of focus on the development of the technology. There's also been quite a lot of focus on safety of those trials and testing. But there are still quite a lot of building blocks that need to be put in place to further that journey. There's the sort of big questions of, well, how do you remove the safety driver? How do you use simulation to demonstrate that a vehicle is safe? But there's also the sort of elements that go around it. So how do you license a vehicle? How do you demonstrate that actually you can put passengers in this vehicle and it's perfectly safe to do so? That's just sort of one of the building blocks that needs to go around it. How do stakeholders, including insurers or road authorities, make sure that actually that they're evaluating safety cases in a consistent way, and that testing organisations can do one journey using one safety case and one set of criteria. So I think there's quite a lot of things that need to be smoothed out and systems that need to be put in place surrounding that sort of technology and that safety case to actually embed it in our existing systems.
Yeah, I think there's been a bit of a change over the last 12 or 18 months in terms of people's predictions for how soon we will have widespread automated vehicles. So going back maybe 5 years, there was a lot of talk about having automated vehicles by 2020. Well, we're in 2020, and they're far from widespread. So I think there's a realisation that technologically it's a harder problem than was originally thought. And particularly the last few percent, if you like, of the problem is exponentially harder, and that is proving quite challenging. But also is challenging in terms of proving the safety performance of the vehicles, and it's quite challenging in terms of a regulatory framework for assuring the safety performance of vehicles before they're allowed on the public road. And I think there's been an acceptance over the last year or so that all of those things are harder than was originally thought, and that will therefore take a little longer.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges is if you've got an automated vehicle that has been modified since type approval, and then you've got an automated driving system that is updated, regular updates in terms of software and increasing capabilities or changing the scope of what it can do, how do you then keep assuring that system and keep approving that system? It's sort of one of the challenges that we're facing.
Yes, and I think there's more realisation that maybe automated vehicles will come through in more tightly defined areas. So, for instance, something like a motorway traffic jam assistance system as a step on the path to understanding how to develop the systems, understanding how to assure that they're safe, and also the public getting a chance to understand how to use them and how to trust in the vehicles.
So how do CAVs enter the mainstream?
Well, I think that they need to fulfil the needs of the consumer. So if they offer something that manual driving or public transport doesn't offer at the moment, there's going to be it's going to be a lot easier for members of the public and the consumer to accept it. It's also got to be affordable. Pricing consumers out of the market, I don't think is going to encourage CAVs sort of within the mainstream. But one of our challenges as well is building that trust for members of the public in the system and in the reliability of the technology.
Yeah, I think we might see CAVs first in a couple of different areas, really. So, for instance, deployed in set areas for set routes. And that could be things like to do with sporting events or something like that, where you're moving people from A to B on relatively fixed routes. And another use might be if you have a long motorway commute, maybe an hour each way every day, you might be very interested in being able to use that time more profitably. And that's also a relatively constrained environment. So compared with having to be able to do every road in Britain, that's a relatively constrained problem to solve. So I think we will see automated vehicles enter into, if you like, niches initially, and then build on that over time into something closer to a level 4 or level 5, more able to go in more places.
So how do we build a safety case?
Well, a safety case is basically a structured argument supported by evidence that demonstrates that a system or a product is safe. Now, whether that's for trials and testing or whether that's for the deployment of a produced vehicle, the concept is the same. It's about demonstrating that you have a functionally and systematically safe vehicle and that it's also safe within the environment that you're putting it in. For trials and testing, generally we start with a risk assessment and we identify everything that could go wrong. But then we identify controls and, largely sort of a safety driver at the moment, but also sort of operational controls in order to manage that risk. When we first started doing trials and testing, TRL was faced with that challenge of there aren't any standards or regulations at the moment, but whilst we need to ensure that we meet the needs of our research, we also need to ensure safety. And this is where the safety case framework was born. And we developed a safety case framework for the gateway trials, which has then subsequently been evolved and developed through various other CAV trials. And now we're the technical author of the BS PAS 1881 that sets out those safety case requirements. But I think it's really important to recognise that actually the level of risk posed varies between trials, and the safety case needs to sort of reflect that level of complexity.
Yes, and I think the safety case for what we're talking about some of the time here in terms of trialling of automated vehicles is one thing, but the safety case for removing the driver from the vehicle, the safety driver from the vehicle at some point, is essentially the same process, but I think the scale of information, the scale of evidence that you require in order to demonstrate adequately that the vehicle is safe enough that you can take that decision and allow it on the public road without a safety driver is much greater. And of course we have facilities like the Smart Mobility Living Lab in London that can help with the generation of that safety case and also help with the interaction with all of the various stakeholders such as the developers and car manufacturers, regulators and the general public, of course.
How does the eventual user of CAVs trust in this technology?
Well, I think that will develop over time. So I think having the sort of robust and rigorous approvals process that we've been talking about is very important for that. But most people won't have an opportunity to engage directly and understand exactly what that process is. So there's definitely a communication challenge there to make sure that people are reassured that a reasonable and robust process has been carried out in evaluating the safety of the vehicles. But also simple things like just the opportunity to try these vehicles. So there have already been a number of trials of automated vehicles in the UK from the Gateway project in London a few years ago that TRL was involved with through various projects that are ongoing at the moment and on into the future, including ones within the SMLL in London. And that doesn't give a large number of people an opportunity to get engaged, but it does give people a chance to understand these vehicles, to ride in the vehicles and experience the vehicles. And of course that allows them to have a voice about their experience and communicate with friends and over social media and so forth about how good it was.
Yeah, I agree. I think the building trust is about addressing their fears as well. And I think there are fears over safety and I think there's fears over security. And one of the key things that we need to make sure is that we're very transparent in our approach with managing those fears. The latest Code of Practice, the FT Code of Practice, actually requires safety cases to be published. And a lot of that, I think, will go towards helping public trust in automated vehicle trials and testing because they understand what is it that's happening, you know, how many vehicles and where it's happening, what the test objectives are, what are the key risks, what are the control measures. So I think that transparency is going to help in building consumer trust.
Could I ask, what kind of response do you get from some of these trials? Can you characterise the kind of range of responses?
It's generally very positive. So people are very interested in the technology. They're very interested in what the ride is like and what the behaviour of the vehicle is like. Most of these trials, or all of these trials, involve essentially prototype vehicles, development vehicles, so they're not capable of doing everything everywhere. But the response and feedback from the people who've had a chance to experience them has been very positive. So the metrics looking at trust and people's impression of safety of the vehicle and of the trial have been very high.
So what is the promise of a CAV future?
Well, I think people often talk about the safety aspects, and there's certainly very, very good potential for improvements in road safety as a result of automating road transport. But I think there are also very clear potential benefits in terms of optimising traffic flows and minimising the use of energy to get people from A to B. And I think actually those things in terms of efficiency and energy consumption might actually come to be seen as the, if you like, one of the bigger wins for automated vehicles long term.
I suppose it's whether we ever get to a point where we can have vehicles that go from any point to another any point, so sort of level 5 automation, whether that's actually ever possible. And if it were possible, whether people would want to adopt that technology, or whether driving as a skill or a hobby or that level of freedom is something that people value over sort of fuel efficiency and sort of the promised increased safety.
Yeah, you could almost question whether we really need to get to level 5, what's called level 5 automation, which is that the vehicle would go anywhere on the public road in any weather conditions, for instance, that a human driver would be expected to be able to cope with and drive safely. That, I think, is a very long way away, but there's an awful lot of benefits that can accrue on the way there for level 4 vehicles that have a restricted operating domain. That can cover the vast majority of journeys, and it can cover the vast majority of energy consumption from road transport.
So this really relies on people wanting to uptake automated vehicles, though. And I can see some areas where it might be useful, sort of maybe within cities or school routes. There's always so much congestion around schools and things like that maybe, rather than having a walking bus, you've got an automated vehicle that collects children and deposits them safely to school. I can see it being useful for people who maybe have sort of health issues and are unable to drive. It may sort of increase their mobility and their freedom.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to make sure that we consider all of the potential applications for automated vehicles, make sure parts of society aren't forgotten in the deployment of AVs in the future. So, for instance, to ensure that automated vehicles can deliver for rural societies, to make sure that the automated vehicles are accessible for everybody. So, regardless of disabilities or impairment, you can still use the services that are going to be using automated vehicles. So, design of the vehicle from the outset to make sure that the use of the vehicle is inclusive of everybody.
So how far away are we from this CAV future?
I think that's a really, really hard question to answer. At the moment, what we're doing is largely assisted driving. So the safety driver is in the vehicle, they're being assisted by automated technology, but they're always in control of the vehicle, they're always monitoring, they can't be distracted. We're not at a point at the moment where a safety driver can be doing an additional task or something totally different. They need to be monitoring the road and ready to take back control, if needed. So we're still, I think, quite a long way off sort of fully automated vehicles where you can take the driver out of that loop.
Yeah, and I think there's also a conversation to have about how people understand how the systems work at different levels of automation, and to make sure that they are aware for current, what are essentially assistance systems, that they are aware that they do still need to provide that oversight of the vehicle. They need to be aware of the situation on the road at all times and be ready to step back in to the control of the vehicle. So I think that's quite an important conversation that everybody who's involved in this needs to have and engage the public on, to make sure that there is a correct understanding for each level of automation that's out there, is what it actually does and what it can't do.
Well, I'd like to thank you both for coming in and talking to us today.
Pleasure.
And thanks also to our listeners for tuning in. See you next time.